Hello wonderful people, my name is Benjamin, this is my book club, and I'm so excited to bring you book 9 of my fantasy reading challenge. This is a book that does several things, 3 in particular, that I've often complained about in other books, that have made me dislike other books outright. But here, something about the writing of this book, not only do I not dislike them, I enjoy them here. They're integral to the story and they're core of what it's about. And it just works. Let's talk about why. The book in question is, of course, the hugely popular, often recommended, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. In the first book of the first Law trilogy, we follow several characters. We have several coinciding narratives. The first of which is following Logan Ninefingers, a warrior barbarian to some from the far north, a man who has lived a life of bloodshed and violence, and who is now seeking, if not redemption, escape perhaps from his previous life, his life of violence. He's seeking a new way of being. He's seeking who he himself is. And in doing this, he travels towards the south when he hears that a powerful magus is looking for him. Then, in the capital city of the Union, the strongest nation in this world, which coincidentally I think is based on, I want to say, Paris and France. There are definite real-world sort of connotations to a lot of the countries and worlds that we find ourselves in here. And I think the Union is sort of like a bit of Europe, but mainly is France, or is situated in France. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But in the capital city of the Union, we follow a arrogant, up himself nobleman by the name of 𝕓𝕠𝕠𝕠𝕜, who's been given everything he needs in life. He's been given his position within the army and the officer corps by right of his birth. He's been given the opportunities he has, and he's currently training to take part and hopefully win the prestigious fencing contest known only as the contest. And we also meet my favourite character, Inquisitor Glotka. Glotka? 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 I think it's Glotka. A former champion of this fencing contest, once a war hero, once a renowned nobleman of his own right, once pegged by many of high society to be the up-and-coming star, someone who to look out for, someone who will one day wield immense political power, unfortunately was captured during a war with one of their enemies and was held by torturers in a prison for many years, and is now back crippled to a point of almost full disability. He feels constant pain. He can't walk without a cane. He has many teeth pulled, mismatched, so he can't chew. He has pain every day of his life, and it is rife through this book with explanations of it. But he has now come back and he's become an inquisitor. As someone who knows firsthand how effective torture can be, he now performs that torture, investigating and interrogating people of interest, criminals, or just the enemies of the king. We also then, I think at least 3 other minor characters that we jump through, whose point of view we see from. And this brings me to the first thing that I've often complained about in other books, and that is having sort of too many coinciding narratives. Objectively, if I look at the things I've complained about in other books, the same is true here. One big issue is with the main 3 characters, we kind of alternate chapters. We'll get one from Logan, we'll get one from Luther, we'll get one from Glotka, and then we'll be back to Logan. Unless, of course, we have one of the minor characters popping in which case we'll have another chapter or 2 in there before we get back to our original trilogy. And this had a very interesting effect on me. It made this book take a very long time to read, objectively, for how long it is, because I would get to the end of a chapter. I would say I was in a Logan Ninefingers chapter. Throughout the chapter, we would be building and building and building and building to a moment of tension, and then we would end on a cliffhanger. And normally ending on a cliffhanger in a chapter is great. It makes me think, oh, cool, I need to keep reading, and it generates that must keep reading until 3 AM in the middle of the night sort of thing. But here, I knew that we were minimum 2 full chapters away. We had to read a Glotka chapter, we had to read a Luther chapter before I'd get back to find the conclusion of this plot point. And we might even have some other minor characters having some chapters here and there, which often led to me at like 10 o'clock at night, I'd read a chapter, we'd get to a cliffhanger, and instead of feeling the need to keep going, I'd know that I wasn't going to read, 4 more chapters that night. So I wasn't going to get the conclusion to the little plot point we were on right now, so it might as well wait till tomorrow. So I think you can look at this as a positive and a negative. For a lot of people, I think this is a positive. The book gives you a lot of stopping points. A lot of points where it doesn't feel bad to put the book down and take a break. I know some friends of mine who can't finish reading a book in a night unless they're at a chapter end. This would be perfect for them. For me, it meant that things just took a bit longer than they should. But saying that, that length of time that it took me to read meant that between those chapters and while I wasn't reading, I was actively thinking about the book. I was actively recontextualizing. I was actively considering the characters' motivations and thoughts and viewpoints. I think this kind of actually helped my retention. Reading less in each sitting instead of reading a monumental amount of text and then not retaining quite as much of it. I think I retained a lot more of the points of the text. I think I retained a lot more of the emotion and the emotive forces. And in the end, I think it made for a better read. And on top of that, these characters are just wonderfully written. I think it's not uncommon to say that Joe Abercrombie writes some of the best character work that's being written today. And I see why people say that. This character work is fantastic. Every character feels alive on the page. They all have goals, ambitions, they all have flaws and backstories. And they all, I think it's key that they don't all work together for most of this, that they are at odds with each other. And we get to see either side of these conflicts. And that makes it just much more compelling and much more likely to be on my brain when I'm not actively reading it. Something else I've complained about, and I know that this is basically just a personal pet peeve of mine, and that this isn't seen as a negative by a lot of people, but for me, I often hate when the first book of a series is just the first book of the series. Let me explain. I mean that it doesn't stand alone. You know, it doesn't conclude its sort of main plot thread. It doesn't come to an ending and then leave it open for more. Like, if you read book 1 of a series and that was all you were going to read, does that book hold up? Does it stand up still? Do you leave feeling fulfilled, like something's been accomplished? Or like you've just been reading the intro to the next book? And The Blade itself is absolutely just the introduction to this series. We don't end with any major plot points wrapped up. We don't end with any more answers than we started with. We don't end with any of our characters' arcs being completed. If there was no book 2 and 3 of the first Law series, and this was the only thing Joe Abercrombie had written, I don't think it would go down as well. I think it's a fantastic opening to a series, but it is heavily reliant on a series following it up to be good. And I know that's unfair, there is a series to follow it up, but, you know, as I said, it's a pet peeve. But here, I don't know, it just works. The way that this is set up is very clearly maneuvering characters to where they need to be for, quote-unquote, the real story to start. Like, the end of this book is not mid-sentence, the end of this book is not mid-conversation, the end of this book is not mid-action scene. The end of this book is the start of the next book, basically. We are starting an adventure. And it's almost like if Fellowship of the Ring ended when the Fellowship was formed and was leaving Rivendell. I can't say that that would be a better book than Fellowship is right now. It wouldn't be. But here it works. I'm not left on a cliffhanger that feels unsatisfying. I'm left on this feeling of hope for the future, of knowing that something bigger is about to start. And while I would still look back on that as a negative in almost every book that I read like it, here it just works. And again, I think it's thanks to the prose and the dialogue and just the flow that this book has, that Joe Abercrombie has put together, that is just magical. And speaking of magical, I am one of those people that prefer my magic systems explained. I prefer to know the rules under which the characters are, you know, playing under. They may not need to know. I don't need my characters to be fully versed in this stuff, but as a reader, I really appreciate knowing the rules. And this isn't just limited to my fantasy reading. This is true in sci-fi, where I like to know what technology we have. Do we have fast and light travel? How does it work? What are our restrictions? And in horror, you know, I like to know, why did this monster get summoned? Who does it eat and why? And what is going on? And again, I don't need the characters to know, but it's nice as a viewer, as a reader, to know these things so that I can enjoy contemplating the outcomes. I can enjoy thinking of solutions to the crisis that the characters are in. A good example of this is the Mistborn book by Brandon Sanderson. Very early on, we are given most of the rules for the magic system, at least as the characters know them. So when it comes into moments of crisis, I could sit there and think, oh, I wonder if they should burn tin here to do this and this and this. And it was just fun kind of doing that problem solving along with them. It reminds me of things like The Martian and Project Hail Mary that I really enjoyed. But suffice to say, I like to know the rules under which the universe we're in works. And here, we know none of those rules. There is magic here, but I didn't know for the longest time, are we dealing with sort of that soft magic where you can kind of influence emotions or bend fates and stuff like that, stuff that's not very visible, or are we dealing with wizards throwing fireballs around? And it's not until nearly the end of the book where I find out more information about even what sort of magic we're dealing with. And it was doubly annoying for parts of it because one of the main characters we introduced to very early on is a wizard's apprentice. And I thought, great, here's The Apprentice. Through some lesson or study, we're going to learn a bit more about how this magic works. We're going to learn the basic rules. We're going to learn what sort of spells we're dealing with. But that doesn't really ever happen. And yet, it again just works in the blade itself. I think it's because magic as a whole in this universe is like dying. This is a world that was clearly once full of magic that is now bereft of it, mostly bereft of it. This is a world where almost everyone has never seen magic. Many people don't believe it exists. It is religious. It is a myth, a story, and yet there are a very few special individuals who do have access to this magic. And the mystery becomes part of the narrative. Instead of it being clearly just hiding information from the reader so that we can't guess what's going on, the characters we're following don't know it as well. And that means that we're in the world of our characters. We are experiencing this magic the same as they are. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know what this powerful wizard is capable of. We have the same fear and trepidation around them that our characters do. And I will caveat this with 2 points. First, I think this only worked because of the characters we were following. If we followed a wizard or a magic user as a viewpoint character, the hiding information would have annoyed me. It would have frustrated me. I don't like it when our viewpoint character clearly knows something but isn't revealing it to us, the reader. And the second point, I think, is that this trick of magic being mysterious and us not knowing what's going on is only going to last and work for me for so long. If I finish book 2 and I still have no idea what the magic system is, what people can do, what's going on, I'm reserving the right to come back here and change this from a positive to a negative, because there's only so long I can get strung along without wanting some answers so I know how things are working. And look, I could go on and on and on, and I basically have about things I liked about this book, but it really boils down to 2 things, I think. First off, I've mentioned it before, the characters are superb. Joe Abercrombie absolutely gets lauded for his character work, as he should. And the second thing, and something I think isn't as talked about as much, at least as far as I've seen, is his prose. It is just fantastic. It is easy to read, descriptive, evocative, emotive. It is some of the best writing that I've read in a very long time. It makes you feel the emotions that you're supposed to feel at that point in the book by the changes in the prose, by the changes in the grammar and the language, and it's just fantastically written. And I could go on and on and on, but honestly, I'm just going to end with I'm giving The Blade itself a 9 out of 10. It just misses that last point because it is very clearly just the intro to the series. I suspect if the series stays this good, though, the whole series as a whole is going to get a 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. So that's my final rating. But before I go for today, The Blade itself hit squares on all 3 of my yearly challenges in 2024. First off, my Goodreads challenge. This brings me up to 77 books read. My goal was 50, so we're smashing it. Secondly, this is the 9th book in my fantasy reading challenge. I have historically been a horror and science fiction reader who kind of eschewed fantasy. I couldn't really get into it. I couldn't get myself excited for it. But after browsing bookstores and seeing that the majority of the books in the sections I'm looking for are fantasy, I decided I needed to widen my horizons, and I told myself that I would read and review 10 fantasy books this year, and this is book number 9. So, unless there's some sort of mammoth tome ahead of me, I think book 10 should be easily be done by the end of December. And finally, bring up my bingo board. This is my bingo board. It is from Reddit's ℚ_fantasy subreddit. It is a yearly challenge full of reading prompts. You have to read a book that matches the prompt, and there's also hard modes, and the challenge mode is to review every book. I am trying to clear every square. These are the ones we've done, and it's looking pretty good. We're doing fairly well. We're doubling down in the back half of the year. I do have until March 31st next year to finish this, and so I think we're going to be okay. This one matches perfectly with the character with a disability square. This one reads that a character has to have a physical or mental disability, and the hard mode is just that it has to be a main character. Inquisitor 𝕨𝕗 is absolutely disabled after his events in the torturer's cells. It is a running point throughout the book of him dealing with his pain, forcing through it to accomplish his goals, and him constantly questioning why he's doing this, him battling with his disability as a person, showing how strong-willed he is, while also showing how much of a disadvantage it's giving him. And it's remarkable how he can push through it, persevere, and still accomplish his goals. And I think it fits perfectly in this square, so I'm going to lock it in. There you have it. If you want to pick up a copy of this book, then please check out the description where I have an Amazon link, where if you click on that, it will give the channel a little bit of money. Other than that, I will see everyone, hopefully before the end of December, with the first Wheel of Time book so that ℓ𝕚𝕚𝕚 stops bullying me. Thank you so much, and remember to keep reading.